I have nowhere to go. The rain had been falling over Los Angeles since early morning. Not the dramatic kind that storms the sky and frightens the streets, but the slow, exhausting kind that seeps into everything. It clung to jackets, darkened sidewalks, and turned the city into a place that felt heavier than usual. Even the palm trees along Sunset Boulevard looked tired, their long leaves drooping under the weight of the gray sky. Cars moved cautiously, headlights reflecting like broken mirrors across the wet asphalt. People hurried beneath umbrellas, each one wrapped in their own private world, their own schedules, their own worries. It was a day that made the city feel crowded and, yet strangely lonely at the same time. Dean Martin had not planned to be out. That afternoon, he had finished a late rehearsal at a small studio not far from the old theaters, his voice still warm. From hours of music, his thoughts drifting toward nothing in particular. Normally, someone else would have driven him. Normally, there would have been a schedule, a car waiting, a clear next step, a debt. But that day, he had asked to walk. He told himself it was for the air, for the quiet, for a moment without lights or conversations or expectations. In truth, he wasn't sure why. He only knew that something in him had wanted to move slowly. To hear the city instead of escaping it, he wore a long, dark coat, the collar turned slightly up against the rain, and a simple hat pulled low, more out of habit than disguise. Most people who passed him didn't recognize him at first. To them, he was just another man moving down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, shoes tapping lightly against the wet concrete. He walked past closed storefronts and glowing cafe windows, past a bus stop where two teenagers laughed too loudly, past a newspaper stand where the headlines screamed about things that suddenly felt very far away. And then, near the entrance of a narrow side street, he saw her. She stood beneath the shallow overhang of an old building, not truly sheltered, just slightly less soaked than the rest of the sidewalk. She was too young, Dean thought immediately, for the heaviness that sat on her shoulders. A thin jacket hung loosely from her frame, darkened by rain. One hand clutched the strap of a worn bag, the other rested unconsciously on her stomach. She was visibly pregnant. Her hair was damp, strands sticking to her cheeks. Her eyes were fixed, somewhere across the street, but they weren't really seeing anything. They had the distant, unfocused look of someone who had been standing in the same place for a long time, watching life pass without knowing where to step back into it. Dean slowed. At first he told himself it was nothing. People stood on streets every day. People waited. People struggled. The city was full of stories he could never possibly touch. But something about the way she stood too still, too quiet, like she was afraid movement might make something fall apart, made his feet hesitate before his mind had time to explain why. He took a few more steps. The girl shifted slightly as if she felt someone near her. Her gaze lifted, and for a brief second, their eyes met. In that instant, Dean saw something that made his chest tighten. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even sadness. It was exhaustion, the kind that didn't come from missing sleep, but from carrying too much for too long with no place to set it down. He nodded politely, prepared to keep walking. He had learned, over years of public life, the delicate balance between kindness and intrusion. But before he could pass her, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, nearly lost beneath the rain. "Sir." Dean stopped. He turned back, surprised at himself for how quickly he did it. "Yes," said gently. She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the strap of her bag. Her eyes flickered, not with uncertainty about him, but with uncertainty about herself, about whether she had the right to speak at all. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to bother you." "You're not bothering me," Dean replied, and he realized as he said it that it was true. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city filled the silenced tires hissing through water, a distant horn, the soft rhythm of rain tapping metal and glass. Then her words came, suddenly as if once they began, they could no longer be held back. "I have nowhere to go." The sentence was simple, almost small, but it landed between them with a weight Dean could feel. He looked at her more carefully now, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders curved inward, protectively, the faint, barely healed mark near her eyebrow. The shoes that had once been white, swelling beneath her jacket that made her both vulnerable and fiercely human. Nowhere? He repeated, not as disbelief, but as invitation. She shook her head. I was staying with someone, but it's over, and I don't. Her voice faltered. She pressed her lips together, steadying herself. I don't have family here. I thought I could figure something out before the baby comes. But everything happened faster than I expected. Dean didn't rush to answer. He had learned that sometimes the most respectful thing you can give someone is space to finish their own truth. I tried the shelter. She went on. They're full. They told me to come back next week, but I don't know where to sleep tonight, and I don't know where I'll be tomorrow. Her eyes dropped to her stomach. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. I can handle a lot, she said, but I don't know how to do this alone. The rain had soaked the front of Dean's coat now. He barely noticed. He had been applauded by crowds. He had sung in rooms where joy rose like heat. He had known success in ways most people only read about. Standing on that narrow street, looking at this young woman trying not to fall apart in public, none of that felt relevant. What mattered was that she had spoken to him. What mattered was that she was here. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated, then answered, Lena. Dean, he said simply. She gave a small nod, not recognizing the name, or perhaps not caring. In that moment, he wasn't a singer to her. He was just a man who had stopped. Dean glanced down the street, then back at her. Have you eaten today? He asked. She looked surprised by the question a little. This morning, Jew, like something warm? Lena studied his face, as if trying to understand what kind of offer this was. People often promised things they couldn't give. People often meant well and disappeared anyway. I don't have money, she said quietly. I didn't ask about money, Dean replied. Another pause, then, almost reluctantly, she nodded. There's a small place around the corner, he said. They make good soup. It's not fancy, but it's warm. For the first time since he had seen her, something shifted in her expression. Not hope, not yet. But the easing of a single layer of tension. Okay, she said. They walked side by side beneath the rain, not close, not distant, to strangers sharing a direction. Inside the cafe, the air was rich with the smell of bread and herbs. Steam clouded the windows. A bell rang softly as the door closed behind them, sealing out the wet afternoon. Dean ordered for both of them without ceremony. He chose things that were simple, filling, gentle. When the bowls arrived, Lena wrapped her hands around hers immediately, as if the heat itself were something she had been missing longer than she realized. She ate slowly, carefully, as if she didn't want to reach the end. Dean watched her, not staring, but noticing. The way color gradually returned to her cheeks, the way her shoulders lowered just a fraction. After a few minutes, she spoke again. I didn't plan any of this, she said. I had school. I had a job. I had someone who said he'd be there, and then, as she gave a small, tired shrug, life changed, and everyone else kept going. Dean nodded. Life has a way of doing that. She looked up at him. Why did you stop? The question caught him off guard. I don't know, he said honestly. I just felt like I should. Lena studied him again. Most people don't. He met her gaze. Maybe most people are in a hurry. She considered that outside. The rain continued to fall, and neither of them yet understood that this small, quiet moment, this bowl of soup, this unexpected conversation was only the beginning of something much larger than either of them had imagined. Because Dean Martin had not only stopped to listen, he was about to do something no one expected, and Lena's life is about to change. The rain did not stop when they left the cafe. If anything, it fell harder, heavier, as though the sky itself had leaned closer to the city. The sidewalk gleamed beneath the streetlights, reflecting long, broken lines of yellow and white. Cars passed like slow rivers. Somewhere down the block, a siren wailed and faded. Los Angeles was wide awake, but Lena walked beside Dean as though she were moving through a world set apart from it. A smaller world where each step required attention, where each breath had weight. She held her bag closer to her chest now, the warmth from the soup still lingering in her hands. In her stomach, in a place much deeper than either. For the first time that day, She was no longer shaking. But the quiet between them was not empty. It was full of questions neither had yet asked. They walked in silence for several minutes, before Lena spoke again. "I didn't think anyone would stop," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the pavement. "I stood there a long time before you came. People looked at me. Some pretended not to. A woman crossed the street. A man told me I should go somewhere else. Like I hadn't already tried." Dean listened, his hands deep in his coat pockets, his pace unhurried. "When you're in that place," she continued, "you start to feel like you're not really a person anymore. Just something in the way." He glanced at her, then forward again. "You're not in the way," he said. "You're in the world." Lena exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They reached a quieter stretch of street, where the noise of traffic thinned and the buildings grew older, lower, their windows dark. An old theater sign flickered above them, letters half burned out, a ghost of past applause. It was there that Lena slowed. "I can't go back to where I was staying," she said. He made that very clear. Dean stopped walking. The rain tapped steadily against the brim of his hat as he turned to face her. "Who is he?" he asked. Lena's jaw tightened. For a moment, she looked like she might say nothing at all. Then she straightened slightly, as if deciding that if she was going to speak, she would speak clearly. "My uncle," she said. "Not by blood. He was a friend of my mother's. When she died, he said I could stay. He said it was temporary, just until I finished school." She swallowed. At first it was fine. "He barely spoke to me. Then I got sick. I missed classes. I started showing. And suddenly, everything about me was a problem. The space I took, the food I ate, the air I breathed." Dean felt something settle in his chest, slow and heavy. "He told me I was irresponsible," Lena went on, "that I'd ruined my life, that I was bringing trouble into his home. And then one night, he said I needed to leave. Not next month. Not when I figured something out. That night," she lifted her eyes to Dean, and there was no drama in them. "Only fact. I packed what I could carry," she said, "and I walked." The rain had soaked her hair again. A drop slid from the tip of her nose. She brushed it away without noticing. "I thought I could sleep at the bus station, but they told me I couldn't stay. I thought I could go back to the shelter, but it was full. I thought I could just keep walking, but eventually you get tired, and you stop." She paused, and then you happened. Dean was silent for a long moment. He had heard many stories in his life. He had stood in rooms where people spoke about hardship as though it were a distant country. But this was not a story being told. This was a life being lived. "You said you were in school?" he said finally. "I was," Lena replied. "Nursing. I wanted to work with mothers. With babies? I used to volunteer at a clinic on Saturdays. I thought, maybe that's what I was meant to do." "And the baby's father?" Dean asked gently. Her gaze shifted away. "He left when I told him," she said. "He said he wasn't ready. He said I'd trapped him. He said a lot of things." Then he stopped answering. Another silence, not empty, heavy. Dean exhaled slowly. "Lena," he said, "what are you planning to do tonight?" She hesitated. "Then honestly, I don't know." The words echoed faintly between them. He looked down the street. The rain, the dark doorways, the long stretch of night ahead. And then, without raising his voice, without making a speech, Dean Martin did something that would later be described in very simple words. He made a decision. "There's a place you can go," he said. She turned toward him, startled. "Another shelter." "No," he replied. "Not tonight." Her brow furrowed. "Then where?" Dean met her eyes. "Somewhere safe," he said. "Somewhere dry. Somewhere you can sleep without watching the door." Lena studied his face. She wasn't foolish. She wasn't naive. Life had already made sure of that. "I don't know you," she said. "No," Dean agreed. "You don't, and you don't know me. That's also true." She held his gaze. "Why would you do this?" Dean didn't answer immediately. He searched himself for a reason that would sound solid, logical, defensible. None of them felt honest enough, because I don't think anyone should be. Carrying what you're carrying alone, he said. Finally, they stood there, rain falling around them. The city breathing beyond them. Lena's hand moved, unconsciously, to her stomach. What kind of place? She asked. A guest house, Dean replied. It belongs to a friend. It's not being used right now. It has a bed, a bathroom, a kitchen. It's quiet. Her voice dropped. And then what? Then he said, tomorrow we talk. About what? About options, Dean replied. About support. About what you want, not just what you're afraid of. Lena looked away again, down the empty street, as though expecting someone to appear and tell her this was a mistake. People don't usually offer this, she said. People are often wrong, Dean answered. Another long pause. Finally, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said. They walked again. This time toward a small parking lot where a dark car waited beneath a flickering light. Dean opened the door for her. She hesitated only a second before stepping inside. As they drove, the city slid past in blurred streaks of color. Lena watched it silently, her reflection faint in the glass. After several minutes, she spoke. Back there, she said. When I said I had nowhere to go, I meant more than just a place. I didn't know who I was supposed to be anymore. Dean glanced at her. And now, she thought, now I don't feel completely invisible. The car turned onto a quieter road. Trees arched overhead. Houses sat back from the street, their lights warm and distant. When they arrived, Dean led her through a small gate and up a short path to a modest guest house tucked behind a larger home. He unlocked the door and stepped aside. After you, said. Lena crossed the threshold. Inside, the space was simple and clean. Couch, a small table, a lamp, a closed door that clearly led to a bedroom. The air smelled faintly of lemon and wood, the kind of place that expected nothing from you. She stood just inside the doorway, her bag still on her shoulder as though afraid the room might disappear if she moved too far into it. This is real? She asked quietly. Dean turned on a lamp. The soft light filled the room. It's real, he said. She set her bag down slowly. Her shoulders trembled once, twice. Then she sat, and without warning. The strength she had been borrowing all day finally let go. She covered her face with her hands, and her breath broke. Dean did not rush toward her. He did not crowd her. He simply pulled a chair a little closer and waited, giving her the dignity of her own moment. After a while, she lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, her voice unsteady. I don't even know how to say thank you, she said. You don't have to, Dean replied. Not tonight. She looked around the room again, as if memorizing it, as if afraid it might vanish when she closed her eyes. I feel like something is about to happen, she said. And I don't know if that scares me, or if it's the first time in months that it doesn't. Oh. Dean stood. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow will come whether we're ready or not. We might as well meet it standing. She nodded as he turned to leave. Lena spoke once more. Dean? Yes. Why are you really doing this? He paused at the door. Then he said something he hadn't planned to say, because once, a long time ago, someone opened a door for me when I didn't know how to knock. He closed the door gently behind him, and Lena, alone in a quiet room for the first time in far too long, placed one hand over her heart and the other over her stomach, and felt something unfamiliar settle inside her. Not certainty, but possibility. Morning did not arrive gently. It crept. Light slid through the thin curtains of the guest house in slow, uncertain lines touching the edge of the small table, the back of the couch, the floor near the door. Outside, birds stirred in the trees, their calls faint and cautious, as though even they were unsure whether the day was welcome yet. The storm had passed, but the world still smelled of rain and clean earth. Everything looked newly washed-hand, strangely exposed. Lena had not slept much. She had lain awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar quiet, waiting for the moment when someone would knock and tell her it was time to leave. Her body rested on a real bed, under a real blanket, but her mind remained on the street, on the months before, on the doors that had closed, and the words that had stayed long after they were spoken. Every small sound had pulled her back to the edge of waking. Every breath had reminded her of the life growing inside her, of the responsibility she carried into whatever tomorrow was going to be. When she finally rose, her movements were slow, almost ceremonial. She touched the wall as she walked, as if confirming that the room had not been imagined. She washed her face in the small bathroom, watching the water run clear over skin that still felt unfamiliar to her own reflection. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she did not see a girl who had been rescued. She saw someone, standing at the beginning of a question she did not yet know how to ask. She stepped outside just as the larger house behind the guest quarters came to life. Somewhere, a door opened. Footsteps crossed a floor. A kettle sang softly. Dean was already awake. He stood in the open kitchen doorway, sleeves rolled, preparing coffee. The morning light softened the lines of his face, but not the seriousness in his eyes. He had slept little himself. He had spent part of the night seated at his desk, not writing, not reading, simply thinking about choices, about responsibility, about the thin line between kindness and consequence. "Good morning," said when he saw her. "Morning," Lena replied. She hesitated, then walked toward the small table on the patio where he had set 2 cups. Steam rose gently from them. They sat. For a while they drank in silence. The warmth of the coffee, the hush of early day, the sound of leaves shifting in the breeze. Then Dean spoke. "I made some calls last night," he said. Lena stiffened slightly, not in fear, but in readiness. "There's a clinic not far from here," he continued. "They work with expecting mothers. Medical care, counseling, resources. They're good people." She nodded. "Okay, and a woman who helps with housing," he added. "Not temporary beds. Actual placements. She doesn't promise what she can't deliver, but she doesn't walk away either." Lena looked down into her cup. "Why are you doing all this?" Dean answered honestly. "Because once the door opens, it's not right to pretend the room doesn't exist." She let out a slow breath. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of being on the street. I've done that. I'm scared of hoping." Dean studied her for a moment. "Hope," he said, "is not a weakness. It's just the bravest thing a person can choose." She met his eyes. Before she could reply, the sound of tires on gravel broke the quiet. Both of them turned. A dark sedan rolled slowly up the drive. Lena's body reacted before her thoughts did. Her fingers tightened around her cup. Her shoulders rose. Color drained from her face. The car stopped. The engine cut. A door opened and Lena stood. "No," she whispered. Dean was on his feet immediately. "Lena." She backed away 1 step. "I didn't tell anyone where I was," she said, her voice barely steady. "I swear I didn't." The man who stepped out of the car was tall, broad-shouldered, his coat too thin for the morning air. His hair was combed carefully, his jaw rigid with something that looked too practiced to be simple anger. Lena did not look at him. Dean did. The man's eyes locked onto Lena. "There you are," he said. The words were not loud. They were controlled. "I've been looking for you." Dean moved, subtly but unmistakably, positioning himself between them. "You're on private property," he said calmly. "What do you want?" The man's gaze flicked to Dean, then back to Lena. "She belongs with me," he said. "She left without her things." "Without talking?" "That's not how you handle family business." Lena's hands trembled. "I didn't leave things," she said quietly. "I left." He scoffed. "You're confused. You're emotional. You're in trouble and you don't even know it." Dean felt the shift then, the way the air thickened, the way the moment bent. "She's not confused," Dean said. "And she's not going anywhere with you." The man smiled slightly as though amused. And who are you? Someone who doesn't think you get to decide where she stands, Dean replied. The man stepped closer. Lena, he said, ignoring Dean entirely. We had an agreement. You live under my roof. You follow my rules. You can't just run off because things got hard. Lena's voice shook. They didn't get hard. They became impossible, he sighed, as though dealing with a stubborn child. You had food. You had a place to sleep. And I was willing to tolerate your situation. Dean's jaw tightened. Tolerate. He repeated. The man finally turned his full attention to him. This is none of your business. Dean did not raise his voice. It became my business when she said she had nowhere to go. The man's eyes narrowed. Do you know what she's done? Do you know the mess she's created? She owes me. I took her in. I spent money. I gave her a roof. And now she disappears and turns up here? Lena closed her eyes. Dean felt something old stir inside him. The part of him that recognized this tone, this language, the part that knew exactly what it cost to grow up feeling like shelter was something you had to earn by shrinking. She doesn't owe you her safety, Dean said, and she doesn't owe you her silence. The man laughed once, sharply. You don't know what you're talking about. Dean took a step forward. I know exactly what I'm talking about, he said. You don't get to frighten someone into staying. You don't get to call control kindness. And you don't get to show up uninvited and pretend you're the one who's been wronged. The man's face hardened. You think you're some kind of hero? He said. She'll ruin your life too. That's what she does. She brings chaos and expects everyone else to clean it up. Lena's breath caught. Dean spoke without hesitation. Leave. The word was not loud. It was final. The man stared at him. Or what? Or you'll be speaking to people who don't offer conversation, Dean replied. Silence stretched. A bird lifted from a nearby tree. The man's jaw worked. He looked at Lena one last time. You'll regret this, he said. You always come back. They always do. Dean did not answer. After a moment, the man turned, got back into his car, and drove away, gravel scattering beneath his tires. Only, when the sound had fully faded, did Lena move. She sank into the wee chair as though her strength had been holding her upright by will alone. I didn't tell him, she said again, shaking. I swear. Dean crouched slightly, so they were closer to eye level. I know, he said. How did he find me? She asked. Sometimes Dean replied gently. People don't find places. They follow fear. And fear leaves tracks. Tears slid down Lena's cheeks. I thought if I just disappeared it would be over, she said. I didn't know he would come looking. Dean handed her a napkin. Running keeps you alive, he said. Standing makes you free. They're not the same, but both matter. She looked at him, eyes full. He said, I always go back, she whispered. Dean shook his head. Not this time. Lena covered her face. And this time, when she cried. She did not cry like someone alone. She cried like someone whose story had witnesses. When her breathing finally slowed, she lowered her hands. I don't even know who you are, she said. Dean hesitated. Then simply, my name is Dean Martin. Her brow furrowed slightly. Then her eyes widened. Recognition bloomed slowly, incredulously. You're... She began. Yes, he said gently. I am. She stared at him. Then she laughed once through tears. I asked a stranger for help, she said. And the world answered with this. Dean smiled faintly. The world answers in many ways. Not all of them wear familiar faces. She shook her head in disbelief. Then her expression changed. But if he knows who you are, she said, fear returning, won't this make things worse? Dean looked at the empty driveway. Maybe, he said. Then he looked back at her. But it will also make them visible. And in that quiet morning, Lena realized something with a clarity that almost frightened her. Dean had not only opened a door, he had stepped into a storm, and he had done it. For her? The house did not feel the same after he left. Even though the driveway was empty, even though the birds returned to the trees and the morning light continued its quiet work across the patio stones. Something invisible lingered in the air, something that had nothing to do with the weather. Lena could still feel it in her chest, the echo of being found when she had believed she was hidden. The cold reminder that some doors in life do not stay closed just because we walk away from them. Dean watched her carefully as she sat, hands wrapped around her cup, shoulders drawn inward again despite the sun. He had seen that posture before, not only in others, but in himself. Long ago, what a person looks like when they are trying to protect something already wounded. Today doesn't have to belong to him, he said quietly. She lifted her eyes. It already feels like it does. Then we take it back, Dean replied. She didn't answer. But something in her breathing shifted. An hour later, they were in the car again, moving through streets now bright with late morning. Storefronts were open. People crossed intersections with coffees in hand. The city had slipped back into its ordinary rhythm, indifferent to the fear that still lived just beneath Lena's skin. She watched it pass this world where everything looked normal, and wondered how many quiet storms moved through it unnoticed. The clinic was a low building painted a soft color that did not demand attention. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and flowers. Women sat in chairs along the wall, some alone, some with mothers or partners. A television murmured quietly in a corner. The room was full but not crowded. It felt like a place that understood waiting. A nurse greeted them with a smile that did not feel rehearsed. She led Lena away gently, asking questions in a voice meant to steady rather than rush. Dean waited, hands folded, his thoughts louder than the room. When Lena returned, her eyes were red again. But this time, not from fear. They say the baby is strong, she told him. They say everything looks good. Dean nodded. That's good news. She sat beside him. They asked if I had support. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't say no.
They left.
Clinic with a small folder in Lena's hands, and something far less visible settling into her chest. But the day was not finished with them. They had just stepped outside when Dean's phone rang. He listened, his expression changed him when he hung up. He did not speak right away. What is it? Lena asked. Dean looked at her. The man from this morning, he said. He's made calls. Her fingers tightened around the folder. To who? To people who know my name, Dean replied. And people who know how to make noise? Lena's breath caught. I didn't want to cause trouble. Dean turned fully toward her. You didn't cause anything, he said. You revealed it. They drove in silence. By the time they reached the house again, a car already waited near the gate. Another man stood beside it, holding a leather folder. Dean parked, then stepped out first. The man approached, professional, measured. Mr. Martin, he said. I'm here on behalf of Charles Heller. Lena stiffened at the name. He claims he has legal standing regarding the young woman with you, the man continued. He's asserting that she is financially dependent, she abandoned property, and that she may be endangering herself. Dean's eyes were calm. She is an adult, Dean said. She is not his property, and she is not in danger. The man opened the folder. He intends to pursue this, and he intends to speak publicly. Lena stepped forward before Dean could stop her. He threw me out, she said. At night, he told me I was a problem. He told me I had ruined his home. The man looked at her, then back at Dean. I'm not here to argue facts, he said. I'm here to warn you. Dean nodded once. Thank you. You may tell Mr. Heller that he should be very careful about the stories he chooses to tell. The man hesitated. Then, good day, Mr. Martin. When the car pulled away, Lena's hands were shaking. He's going to make this ugly, she said. Dean did not deny it. Yes, he said. He is. She looked at him, fear breaking through again. I don't want to be the reason your life becomes chaos. Dean met her eyes. Lena, he said, my life has been chaos and music and mistakes and miracles for a very long time. It has survived worse things than truth. She swallowed. What if he lies? Then we answer with more than words, Dean replied. That afternoon, Dean made several calls of his own, not to lawyers first, to people. to the director of the clinic, to the woman who helped with housing, to a friend who funded community programs, to another who managed a foundation that supported young mothers. Lena sat quietly nearby, listening to pieces of conversation she did not fully understand, watching something unfold around her that felt both too large and impossibly close. By evening, the house was no longer quiet. Two women arrived first. One older, one younger, both with gentle eyes and firm voices. They spoke with Lena for a long time. They asked questions, not to collect information, but to understand her. They did not interrupt. They did not rush. When Lena spoke about being told she was a burden, the older woman reached across the table and rested her hand over hers. "You are carrying a life," she said. "That alone makes you worthy of protection." Later, a man arrived with papers. Then another. Plans were discussed. Steps were outlined. Not dreams-paths. Dean watched from the doorway, and for the first time since he had seen her on the street, Lena's posture began to change. Not suddenly, but unmistakably. The following morning, the story broke, not the one Charles Heller intended. Another one, a short piece first. Then another, then interviews. The truth spoken not in anger, but in clarity. A young pregnant woman displaced. A powerful figure trying to rewrite it. A public response that did not accuse, but refused to hide. Dean did not describe Lena, he described responsibility. He did not tell her story. He told his. About doors that had once been opened for him. About the quiet ways people disappear. About the difference between charity and commitment. The attention grew, and with it, the protection. Within days, Lena was offered a small apartment through a transitional program connected to the clinic. It was not large. It was not glamorous. But it had windows that faced the morning and a door that locked from the inside. The first night she stood in it alone. She did not unpack. She sat on the floor and cried. Not because she was afraid, but because she was home. Dean visited once. Bringing nothing but coffee and a folded blanket, she showed him the place. Embarrassed by how little there was. "It's perfect," he said. She laughed softly. "You don't have to say that." "I do," he replied. "Because it's yours." Weeks passed. Lena returned to her classes slowly, carefully. The clinic arranged support. The women from that first afternoon became fixtures in her life. She volunteered again, this time not as someone pretending to be strong, but as someone learning what strength actually was. The man who had come looking did not return. The noise he promised never grew, because too many quiet people were now watching. One evening, months later, Lena stood on a small stage at the clinic's fundraising event. Her hands shook slightly as she held the microphone. The room was full. Not with celebrities, with mothers, with nurses, with people who knew exactly how fragile hope could be. "I used to think kindness was something you received," she said. "Like a gift. Something that made you smaller because you needed it. I was wrong. Kindness didn't make me small. It reminded me that I was already here." She found Dean in the audience. "And sometimes," she continued, "it doesn't come from who you expect. It comes from someone who simply refuses to keep walking." When she stepped down, Dean did not applaud louder than anyone else, but he stood, and that was enough. Later that night, as the room emptied and the chairs were stacked, Lena approached him. "I never asked you," she said. "What made you stop that day?" Dean smiled faintly. "Because I finally understood something," he said. "Fame fades. Money moves. But the moment you choose not to turn away from someone, that stays." She looked down at her stomach, now round and full and undeniable. "My baby will know your name," she said. Dean shook his head. "Let your baby know your strength," she smiled. And in that moment, Lena did not look like a girl who had nowhere to go. She looked like someone who had found exactly where she was meant to stand.